Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on business-driven metadata solutions. My name is Michael Paye. I'm the CTO of Concept Searching, and I head up our development team that's based out of the UK. So what we're going to be taking a look at today is some of the benefits of applying metadata to documents, in particular how Concept Searching can assist with this process by automatically analysing documents. Throughout the session, I'll use a couple of demos to highlight the capabilities of our product offering in line with certain requirements. As a bit of an introduction, for those of you that perhaps don't know who we are, we've been around for some 16 years. We're focused predominantly on metadata generation, auto-classification, and taxonomy management, with many of the world's largest corporations deploying our platform. Our product is designed to crawl and analyze content in lots of different content repositories, and our engine can then be used to generate semantic metadata to deliver enhancements to many business areas, such as search and migration. So just to start us off, we've got a particular statement on the screen here from IDC, and I'm particularly keen on this statement because I think it really drives home the importance of accurate document retrieval. If we're making business decisions based on content that we can't accurately retrieve, then we can't truly rely on the decisions we're making. And as organizations get larger and more content comes into the organization, this becomes more and more important. So we know that our unstructured content is growing quickly. I think what's particularly surprising is how quickly, even exponentially, it's growing. With this level of content, it's quite unrealistic to use manual tagging techniques, not only due to the unreliable nature of end-user tagging, but also the sheer time required in manually processing this level of content. The impact of this at the better end of the scale is poor search, but at the worse end of the scale, there's a serious risk of non-compliance. And this problem is particularly relevant from the perspective of records management. As your records management plan grows larger and larger, it will in turn take an end user longer to accurately apply it to a document, which is only made harder, if not impossible, as your document numbers and sizes grow within your organization. So I'm going to go through some of the problems that we've seen when we've gone through industries in terms of manual tagging. The first issue is inconsistency, and this may be because business alignments change over time, so your terminology might shift and the tags that have been applied in the past are no longer relevant now. And it's perhaps due to the subjective nature of tagging. What I mean by this is a user in HR is likely to choose vastly different tags to a user in a technical department. And it doesn't necessarily mean that either user is wrong, but they both go through the work that they're working on in very different ways, so they're likely to see a document in different lights. The second issue is expense. The process of manually tagging documents takes an incredibly long time, which lowers user productivity. And finally, perhaps the worst issue that we sometimes see, is malicious compliance. And by this what I mean is the fact that the user may simply select the first option from a drop-down list, or leave it as the default value, given that they don't actually perceive any value on their part. And what we end up with there is concerns particularly regarding whether the metadata that we have we can actually use, or whether we can't trust it at all. So how do we come in? The key differentiator within our application is our compound term processing search index, which is at the heart of all of our engine work. Traditional search assumes that the end user knows exactly what they're looking for, or must enter a very specific combination of words to get a usable result. This leads to end users needing to identify content in the context of what they are seeking. The fundamental problem with search solutions like that is that they're typically based on an index of single words, yet most queries are expressed in a short pattern of words and not single words in isolation, which are highly ambiguous. In the example on this slide, we have a search for the phrase triple heart bypass. A typical search engine, out of the box, would treat this phrase in a highly ambiguous way, potentially returning documents about road networks or baseball. With compound term processing, in a language agnostic fashion, we can identify the concept itself using the whole phrase, and ultimately improve the precision of our search results, as well as return documents that may not contain the exact phrase we originally searched for, but are linked in meaning. So you may then ask, what's our goal? What we're looking to achieve with all of this technology is achieve a business-wide central metadata repository that can be used to apply consistent metadata to your content, regardless of whether it's structured or unstructured data. The benefit of this is once we have it, we can very quickly respond to changing business requirements, or more importantly, regulatory changes. The question, of course, then comes down to how do we do it? And the way that this works is by having a core classification engine. The way that these typically work is in 4 key stages. The first stage is the document preparation stage, which focuses on extracting the largest amount of data possible from the document. The concept here really is that the more data we have to work with, the more accurate our classifications can be. The second stage then takes our data and passes it into whichever engine is being used, such as a term-based or a statistical engine. The final stages can then agnostically take the parsed data and classify it by applying the techniques available to it. The classifications can then be ranked and applied to the documents to benefit the source system, whether that be for records management or migration or some other business need. Concept searching leverages a statistical approach, which helps us when we're trying to balance precision and recall, while staying agnostic of the document language. For those of you not from a search background, when we talk about precision versus recall, what we're really talking about is trying to balance our rules so that they're not so generic that we return too many documents, but also not so specific that we exclude some relevant content, essentially balancing false positives and false negatives. So all of this is fairly high level at this point. So what I'm going to do now is take a look at how auto-classification can occur in action and how useful it can be to the end user. So I've gone across to a SharePoint library, and in this case I'm going to focus on SharePoint because it gives a very dynamic experience. A lot of people do use it, and of course we have the benefit that SharePoint does directly integrate with a form of taxonomy. So what we're looking at here is a fairly typical standard document library in a SharePoint site collection. And within it, we've got a few different managed metadata columns. Now, managed metadata columns are the columns within the library that we're able to pin our metadata to from our central repository. So we've got one called IPSV, one called Enterprise, and one called Workflow. And what we can see if we look through the library is consistent tagging across all of the documents. One of the important takeaways from that is that obviously with this number of documents and the number of tags that we can see here, at best we'd be expecting a user to perhaps take 5-6 minutes to select all of the tags that we can see here, having opened the 10-page document, read all of it, tried to balance their own sort of perception of the document against what the business needs are, and then go through perhaps quite a large taxonomy to find the most appropriate terms. So what the benefit of using concept searching is, even if something is perhaps slightly wrong, it will be consistently applied to all the documents, and when an error is located, we can very easily adjust that within the engine and push out that change to all of our documents without having to concern ourselves with finding the ones that are perhaps correctly tagged or incorrectly tagged by users with that particular term. So the next question, of course, is how we get this metadata into SharePoint. And the way we look at this is in 2 different ways. We have our day 0 instance where we come in and there's no metadata on our documents. And there's the documents that an end user might bring into the repository as they're working through their day-to-day life. So we're going to demonstrate how that would work in 2 different ways. First of all, I'm going to drag a few documents into this library. And as I drag them into SharePoint, what's going to happen is some event receivers are going to fire off to the concept searching server to notify them of these new documents. What that then means is concept searching pretends effectively these are completely new documents as if we were in a day 0 scenario. It will analyze them in the background, classify them, and then push the classifications back to SharePoint. What I'm also going to do is demonstrate what would happen as an end user when I'm working in my day-to-day life and I'm uploading a particular document. So what I'm going to do is upload a nice large newsletter that's about 14 pages long. So obviously as an end user, it would take me a considerable amount of time to read that and understand it. So what's going to happen very quickly, almost too quickly for a demo, we can see that concept searching has identified to the end user the fields that are going to be automatically populated. And then we can see that there's an indication that classification has occurred and metadata has been populated back to the form so that the end user can immediately gain the benefit of seeing what this is tagged as. And we've got a few different benefits, obviously, that we can see here. The first one is that the end user can very quickly identify the subjects that this document is about, even if they haven't perhaps had a chance to properly read it. So that gives them an indication perhaps that they're uploading it to the wrong location, or they may need to consider what knowledge management system it needs to be in. The other side of it is that the tags that are being applied can, of course, indicate a records management technique that can be applied to the document. So we've got one of the fields down here, workflow, which is identifying that this has some content within it that perhaps has some regulatory implications. So what we can do from that is perhaps decide to remove the document or implement some other policy on that document to ensure that it's safe. What concept searching also provides to the end users from this particular view is the ability to see why we're applying these classifications. So if we look at this particular one, what we can see if we drill down, we can see this one's been tagged as EU institutions because we've got the nice compound term of European Commission within the document. If we look through, we can see a number of other terms have been applied. We've got traffic control and traffic management. So we can very quickly take away that this document contains some regulatory information about the EU, supposedly or logically about traffic management and traffic control, but being a newsletter, it contains potentially quite a lot of different areas published by the EU. So hopefully, while that document was classifying the background, if we now refresh the slide behind, or the page behind, we should see the classifications have been written back by the core index. And there we go. So we can see actually in particular on this one here, probably about 50 different terms have been applied to that document. So I think that really drives home the importance of understanding that manual tagging is not a particularly reasonable technique within an organization, and highlights how quickly we can get those auto classifications in once we have a consistent rule set within our organization. So just going back to the slides. Yeah, so the demo that we've just seen, I hope really does demonstrate the power and benefit of applying classifications to documents at the source. In this case, our classifications reside in a type of taxonomy known as a term set in SharePoint, which allows the metadata to be centrally managed for the whole SharePoint environment. But I think it's important to note that there are lots of different ways that we can get our metadata in, and lots of different knowledge management systems we can use with this same behavior. So concept searching does natively support SharePoint, for example, in this particular instance, but there's also a number of APIs that are available to integrate with any knowledge management system that is keeping documents or keeping records that you wish to then be able to auto-classify and act upon. So I think it's very important to understand at this particular point that there are lots of different types of taxonomies that we have available for deployment. And the reason for this is that a taxonomy that's used by medical researchers, for example, would be quite different from a general business taxonomy that's being used to improve search results across the enterprise. And ultimately, we need to understand that the way we build out our taxonomy really does depend on our own internal business requirements, which is why it's quite important to choose a flexible solution when you're looking at auto-classification products. The key reason for this really is that obviously in certain cases you're going to be looking to be as precise as possible in your auto classification techniques, because you can't afford for something to occur. Say for example you're moving documents to a public site, you can't afford for even the tiniest amount of sensitive information to slip through. But on the other hand, if we're looking from perhaps more of a search perspective, it's more useful for the end user to have multiple ways to filter their content down, so we can be a little bit more vague in the way that we filter our content and classify our content. So if you're just beginning your journey with taxonomies today, the content on the slide may not mean that much to you, but those of you that have been evaluating solutions for some time, these are features that I hope you can see will assist with both taxonomy development and management. So our taxonomy software was designed for ease of use, and in fact it's a development requirement in all of our products. Our technology approach is very user-friendly and very much geared to subject matter experts who may know nothing about information technology, but do of course understand your corpus of content. And usually what we tend to see is a mix of both IT and business professionals working in tandem to manage the taxonomies within our client base. Unfortunately, while I don't have time to show a full demo of the features of that product, I will shortly demonstrate some of the key features within TaxonomyManager, which we use to manage both taxonomies within our own application and also directly with SharePoint, for example. Before I move on to the demo though, here's a quick list of some of the types of projects that we're used to working in. More recently, our projects have mostly been focused on knowledge management, migration and compliance, particularly, of course, with the big push at the moment for GDPR compliance, which is particularly relevant with taxonomies and records in terms of identifying documents that contain any type of sensitive information, whether we're using very much standard rules to identify particular words or phrases that may indicate that we shouldn't be pushing that document or keeping that document in a location, or whether we're looking to use NLP to identify names and organization names within a document that may suggest that it's in the wrong location. Or, of course, at the more sort of fuzzy end, we might be looking for things like social security numbers and credit card numbers. All of those are very, very important to work together so that we can very much minimize or remove our risk of non-compliance in light of regulatory changes like GDPR. So what I'm going to do now is move on to the demo of Taxonomy Manager, which will show you how it is so simple really to build out taxonomies, build out taxonomy rules, and see how we can get immediate feedback from the auto classification engine to see how that's going to affect our documents in real time. So before I move over onto the demo taxonomy, what I'm going to very quickly look at is we can see the native integration here with SharePoint. And what we've got is a very much pre-built taxonomy, which was one of the taxonomies, in fact, that we were using in the SharePoint demo earlier. So we can see this particular term that's residing in SharePoint is called mineral resources. We've got a number of clues sitting here. We've got mineral resources, minerals, rocks, sand, soil, gravel, and so on and so forth. And what this really suggests to us is we're normalizing all of this language to one particular term, so that when the user then applies that term to a search or applies that term to a migration, they're not just simply looking for that one word or that one phrase. They're using all of this business terminology that's been curated into the taxonomy to drive it intelligently rather than just with very simple expressions. But of course, the question that we typically get is how quickly can we build this out, and how can we build this out with the level of content we've got? So that's what I'm going to demonstrate now. What I'm going to do is set up a completely new taxonomy and then look at how we might build out some rules for that. So I'm going to completely start from scratch. I'm going to build out a taxonomy called demo. And then I'm going to look at a particular type of sensitive information. I'm going to look at annual reports within an organization, which obviously, while they're going to contain some similar language across them, will vary every time that they're written, perhaps as the business changes in style and structure, and perhaps because accountants change and so on and so forth. So I'm going to create a term within my taxonomy called annual reports. And once I've got that, I'm then going to search, and I'm going to start off with the very simple example of annual reports. So this would be what we would typically see as an end user. You know, we're going to try and find our annual reports, so we're literally going to search for the phrase annual report. The problem with that is not every annual report will necessarily have that. It might be called a financial report or a quarterly statement, as well as any other number of terms and bits of language that could be in there. So what I'm going to do is take my highest scoring terms, which I know are annual reports, and I'm going to do something called suggest clues. And what this immediately does is takes the documents that have the term annual reports in them and pulls out both individual words and compound terms from those documents that are highly relevant statistically within them. So they might seem potentially odd to the end user, but from a statistical perspective, in terms of identifying those documents, they're highly relevant. So what it's enabled us to do is very quickly, without any knowledge of the content itself, is identify a set of terminology that we can use to accurately increase the size of our set. So what I can quickly do is then say, okay, I want financial reporting, financial statements, auditor reports, investment activity, cash flow, end of the financial, presumably end of the financial year. And of course, we see annual report as a clue. And we'll put in a couple of others as well, just for good measure. So what this enables us to do very quickly is then build up this rule set of clues that we're going to use to identify our content. But what we immediately then need to be able to do is understand how that's going to affect the documents that we're classifying. And the way we do that is through the exact same experience we initially went through, which is the search experience. So by doing the exact same search again, and searching for annual reports, we have the documents from which we gained our initial language. And I can do two different things here. The first one is view the calculations link. And this gives us a top-level view of how those documents are being tagged. So I can see a good level amount of information and what score this document is going to achieve. Obviously, because we specifically pulled the language from these documents, we can see a very high score is being achieved. What I can also do is at a very top level is show document movements. And the benefit of doing this is we see a very top level view of how each of the documents in our set are going to be affected. So I can see all my scores here that are being applied to them. And I can see, more importantly, a document here is not being applied. So this particular one, merge order, is not being applied with a score of minus 47. So what we could then do is if we wanted that document to be applied, we could alter our rules and alter our classifications to ensure that the rules that we have would then include that or wouldn't include it. I hope that sort of drives home how quickly and easily this can be achieved without too much IT experience. As I mentioned a moment ago, the driving force behind the technology that we produce is to produce an application that is not expected, it's not expected to be used by a particularly IT literate user. Obviously, it's infeasible for IT as an organization, or sorry, a unit within the organization, to be solely responsible for this, particularly given obviously they don't have ownership of the content that needs to be classified, and they may not truly understand or know the best ways to classify content within the organization. So it's particularly important to understand that this process requires some collaboration with both IT to initially get the software set up, but also the knowledge owners, so they can accurately identify whether the rules that are being put in place reflect the kind of content that they're used to curating. And I think that's fairly reflective of both our organization and the way our product works, and all of the other products that are on the market. So there should be an expectation that there is going to be some workforce required from IT and also from the business owners themselves. Going back to the slides now. So that brings us to the end of this session today. I really do hope you enjoyed attending, and I hope I was able to spark a greater interest in taxonomies. It looks like we finished a little bit early on this one today. If you're interested in any more information, our next webinar is based in February with Robert. And for more details or to register, please check the upcoming webinars area of our website. You will, of course, also receive an email from us today providing links to both the webinar and the presentation, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for attending.